Letter 1. Oriental Hotel, Yokohama, May 21st. 18 days of unintermitted rolling over desolate rainy seas brought the city of Tokyo early yesterday morning to Cape King, and by noon we were steaming up the Gulf of Yedo, quite near the shore. The day was soft and grey, with a little faint blue sky, and, though the coast of Japan is much more prepossessing than most coasts, there were no startling surprises either of colour or form. Broken wooded ridges, deeply cleft, rise from the water's edge. Grey, deep-roofed villages cluster about the mouths of the ravines, and terraces of rice cultivation, bright with the greenness of English lawns, run up to a great height among dark masses of upland forest. The populousness of the coast is very impressive, and the gulf everywhere was equally peopled with fishing boats, of which we passed not only hundreds, but thousands in 5 hours. The coast and sea were pale, and the boats were pale too, their hulls being unpainted wood, and their sails pure white duck. Now and then a high-sterned junk drifted by like a phantom galley, then we slackened speed to avoid exterminating a fleet of triangular-looking fishing boats with white square sails, and so on through the greyness and dampness, hour after hour. For long I looked in vain for Fujisan, and failed to see it, though I heard ecstasies all over the deck, till, accidentally looking heavenwards instead of earthwards, I saw far above any possibility of height, as one would have thought, a huge truncated cone of pure snow, 13,080 feet above the sea, from which it sweeps upwards in a glorious curve, very wan, against a very pale blue sky, with its base and the intervening country veiled in a pale grey mist. It was a wonderful vision, and shortly, as a vision, vanished. Except the cone of Tristan d'Acunha, also a cone of snow, I never saw a mountain rise in such lonely majesty, with nothing near or far to detract from its height and grandeur. No wonder that it is a sacred mountain, and so dear to the Japanese that their art is never weary of representing it. It was nearly 50 miles off when we first saw it. The air and water were alike motionless. The mist was still and pale, grey clouds lay restfully on a bluish sky, the reflections of the white sails of the fishing boats scarcely quivered. It was all so pale, wan, and ghastly that the turbulence of crumpled foam which we left behind us, and our noisy, throbbing progress, seemed a boisterous intrusion upon sleeping Asia. The gulf narrowed, the forest-crested hills, the terraced ravines, the picturesque grey villages, the quiet beach life, and the pale blue masses of the mountains of the interior became more visible. Fuji retired into the mist in which he enfolds his grandeur for most of the summer. We passed Reception Bay, Perry Island, Webster Island, Cape Saratoga, and Mississippi Bay, American nomenclature which perpetuates the successes of American diplomacy, and not far from Treaty Point came upon a red lightship with the words Treaty Point in large letters upon her. Outside of this, no foreign vessel may anchor. The bustle among my fellow passengers, many of whom were returning home, and all of whom expected to be met by friends, left me at leisure as I looked at unattractive, unfamiliar Yokohama, and the pale grey land stretched out before me, to speculate somewhat sadly on my destiny on these strange shores, on which I have not even an acquaintance. On mooring, we were at once surrounded by crowds of native boats, called by foreigners sampans, and Dr. Gulick, a near relation of my Hilo friends, came on board to meet his daughter, welcomed me cordially, and relieved me of all the trouble of disembarkation. These sampans are very clumsy-looking, but are managed with great dexterity by the boatmen, who gave and received any number of bumps with much good nature, and without any of the shouting and swearing in which competitive boatmen usually indulge. The partially triangular shape of these boats approaches that of a salmon fisher's punt used on certain British rivers. Being floored gives them the appearance of being absolutely flat-bottomed, But, though they tilt readily, they are very safe, being heavily built and fitted together with singular precision with wooden bolts and a few copper cleats. They are sculled, not what we should call rowed, by 2 or 4 men with very heavy oars made of 2 pieces of wood working on pins placed on outrigger bars. The men scull standing and use the thigh as a rest for the oar. They all wear a single wide-sleeved, scanty blue cotton garment, not fastened or girdled at the waist, straw sandals, kept on by a thong passing between the great toe and the others, and if they wear any headgear, it is only a wisp of blue cotton tied round the forehead. The one garment is only an apology for clothing, and displays lean concave chests and lean muscular limbs. The skin is very yellow, and often much tattooed with mystical beasts. The charge for sampans is fixed by tariff, so the traveller lands without having his temper ruffled by extortionate demands. The first thing that impressed me on landing was that there were no loafers, and that all the small, ugly, kindly-looking, shriveled, bandy-legged, round-shouldered, concave-chested, poor-looking beings in the street had some affairs of their own to mind. At the top of the landing steps there was a portable restaurant, a neat and most compact thing, with charcoal stove, cooking and eating utensils complete, but it looked as if it were made by and for dolls, and the mannequin who kept it was not 5 feet high. At the custom house we were attended to by minute officials in blue uniforms of European pattern and leather boots, very civil creatures, who opened and examined our trunks carefully and strapped them up again, contrasting pleasingly with the insolent and rapacious officials who perform the same duties at New York. Outside were about 50 of the now well-known jinrikishas, and the air was full of a buzz produced by the rapid reiteration of this uncouth word by 50 tongues. This conveyance, as you know, is a feature of Japan, growing in importance every day. It was only invented 7 years ago, and already there are nearly 23,000 in one city, and men can make so much more by drawing them than by almost any kind of skilled labor, that thousands of fine young men desert agricultural pursuits and flock into the towns to make draught animals of themselves. Though it is said that the average duration of a man's life after he takes to running is only 5 years, and that the runners fall victims in large numbers to aggravated forms of heat and lung disease. Over tolerably level ground a good runner can trot 40 miles a day, at a rate of about 4 miles an hour. They are registered and taxed at 8 shillings a year for one carrying 2 persons, and 4 shillings for one which carries one only, and there is a regular tariff for time and distance. The kuruma, or jinrikisha, consists of a light perambulator body, an adjustable hood of oiled paper, a velvet or cloth lining and cushion, a well for parcels under the seat, 2 high slim wheels, and a pair of shafts connected by a bar at the ends. The body is usually lacquered and decorated according to its owner's taste. Some show little except polished brass, others are altogether inlaid with shells known as Venus' ear, and others are gaudily painted with contorted dragons or groups of peonies, hydrangeas, chrysanthemums, and mythical personages. They cost from £2 upwards. The shafts rest on the ground at a steep incline as you get in. It must require much practice to enable one to mount with ease or dignity. The runner lifts them up, gets into them, gives the body a good tilt backwards, and goes off at a smart trot. They are drawn by 1, 2, or 3 men, according to the speed desired by the occupants. When rain comes on, the man puts up the hood and ties you and it closely up in a covering of oiled paper, in which you are invisible. At night, whether running or standing still, they carry prettily painted circular paper lanterns 18 inches long. It is most comical to see stout, florid, solid-looking merchants, missionaries, male and female, fashionably dressed ladies armed with card cases, Chinese compradores and Japanese peasant men and women flying along Main Street, which is like the decent respectable high street of a dozen forgotten country towns in England, in happy unconsciousness of the ludicrousness of their appearance, racing, chasing, crossing each other, their lean, polite, pleasant runners in their great hats shaped like inverted bowls, their incomprehensible blue tights, and their short blue overshirts with badges or characters in white upon them, tearing along, their yellow faces streaming with perspiration, laughing, shouting, and avoiding collisions by a mere shave. After a visit to the consulate, I entered a kuruma and, with 2 ladies in 2 more, was bowled along at a furious pace by a laughing little mannequin down Main Street, a narrow, solid, well-paved street, with well-made sidewalks, curbstones, and gutters, with iron lamp-posts, gas lamps, and foreign shops all along its length, to this quiet hotel recommended by Sir Wyville Thomson, which offers a refuge from the nasal twang of my fellow voyagers, who have all gone to the caravanserais on the Bund. The host is a Frenchman, but he relies on a Chinaman, the servants are Japanese boys in Japanese clothes, and there is a Japanese groom of the chambers in faultless English costume, who perfectly appeals me by the elaborate politeness of his manner. Almost as soon as I arrived, I was obliged to go in search of Mr. Fraser's office in the settlement. I say search, for there are no names on the streets. Where there are numbers, they have no sequence, and I met no Europeans on foot to help me in my difficulty. Yokohama does not improve on further acquaintance. It has a dead-alive look. It has irregularity without picturesqueness, and the grey sky, grey sea, grey houses, and grey roofs look harmoniously dull. No foreign money except the Mexican dollar passes in Japan, and Mr. Fraser's compradore soon metamorphosed my English gold into Japanese satsu, or paper money, a bundle of yen nearly at par just now with the dollar, packets of 50, 20, and 10-sen notes, and some rouleaux of very neat copper coins. The initiated recognize the different denominations of paper money at a glance by their differing colors and sizes, but at present they are a distracting mystery to me. The notes are pieces of stiff paper with Chinese characters at the corners, near which, with exceptionally good eyes or a magnifying glass, one can discern an English word denoting the value. They are very neatly executed, and are ornamented with the chrysanthemum crest of the Mikado and the interlaced dragons of the empire. I long to get away into real Japan. Mr. Wilkinson, HBM's acting consul, called yesterday and was extremely kind. He thinks that my plan for travelling in the interior is rather too ambitious, but that it is perfectly safe for a lady to travel alone, and agrees with everybody else in thinking that legions of fleas and the miserable horses are the great drawbacks of Japanese travelling. Letter 2. Yokohama, May 22nd. Today has been spent in making new acquaintances, instituting a search for a servant and a pony, receiving many offers of help, asking questions and receiving from different people answers which directly contradict each other. Hours are early. 13 people called on me before noon. Ladies drive themselves about the town in small pony carriages attended by running grooms called bettos. The foreign merchants keep kurumas constantly standing at their doors, finding a willing, intelligent coolie much more serviceable than a lazy, fractious, capricious Japanese pony, and even the dignity of an ambassador extraordinary and minister plenipotentiary is not above such a lowly conveyance as I have seen today. My last visitors were Sir Henry and Lady Parkes, who brought sunshine and kindliness into the room, and left it behind them. Sir Harry is a young-looking man scarcely in middle life, slight, active, fair, blue-eyed, a thorough Saxon with sunny hair and a sunny smile, a sunshiny geniality in his manner, and bearing no trace in his appearance of his 30 years of service in the East, his sufferings in the prison at Peking, and the various attempts upon his life in Japan. He and Lady Parkes were most truly kind, and encouraged me so heartily in my largest projects for travelling in the interior that I shall start as soon as I have secured a servant. When they went away, they jumped into kurumas, and it was most amusing to see the representative of England hurried down the street in a perambulator with a tandem of coolies. As I look out of the window, I see heavy, two-wheeled man-carts drawn and pushed by 4 men each, on which nearly all goods, stones for building, and all else are carried. The 2 men who pull press with hands and thighs against a crossbar at the end of a heavy pole, and the 2 who push apply their shoulders to beams which project behind, using their thick, smoothly shaven skulls as the motive power when they push their heavy loads uphill. Their cry is impressive and melancholy. They draw incredible loads, but as if the toil which often makes every breath a groan or a gasp were not enough, they shout incessantly with a coarse, guttural grunt, something like ha-hui-da, ho-hui-da, wa-ho, ha-hui-da, etc. Letter 3. HBM's Legation, Yedo, May 24th. I have dated my letter Yedo according to the usage of the British legation, but popularly the new name of Tokyo or Eastern Capital is used, Kyoto, the Mikado's former residence, having received the name of Saikyo or Western Capital, though it has now no claim to be regarded as a capital at all. Yedo belongs to the old regime and the shogunate, Tokyo to the new regime and the restoration, with their history of 10 years. It would seem an incongruity to travel to Yedo by railway, but quite proper when the destination is Tokyo. The journey between the 2 cities is performed in an hour by an admirable, well-metalled double-track railroad, 18 miles long, with iron bridges, neat stations, and substantial roomy termini, built by English engineers at a cost known only to government, and opened by the Mikado in 1872. The Yokohama station is a handsome and suitable stone building, with a spacious approach, ticket offices on our plan, roomy waiting rooms for different classes, uncarpeted, however, in consideration of Japanese clogs, and supplied with the daily papers. There is a department for the weighing and labeling of luggage, and on the broad, covered stone platform at both termini, a barrier with turnstiles, through which, except by special favor, no ticketless person can pass. Except the ticket clerks who are Chinese, and the guards and engine drivers who are English, the officials are Japanese in European dress. Outside the stations, instead of cabs, there are kurumas, which carry luggage as well as people. Only luggage in the hand is allowed to go free. The rest is weighed, numbered, and charged for, a corresponding number being given to its owner to present at his destination. The fares are 3rd class, an ichibu, or about 1 shilling, 2nd class, 60 sen, or about 2 and 4, and 1st class, a yen, or about 3 and 8. The tickets are collected as the passengers pass through the barrier at the end of the journey. The English-built cars differ from ours in having seats along the sides, and doors opening on platforms at both ends. On the whole, the arrangements are continental rather than British. The first-class cars are expensively fitted up with deeply cushioned red Morocco seats, but carry very few passengers, and the comfortable seats, covered with fine matting, of the 2nd class are very scantily occupied, but the 3rd-class vans are crowded with Japanese who have taken to railroads as readily as to kurumas. This line earns about $8 million a year. The Japanese look most diminutive in European dress. Each garment is a misfit and exaggerates the miserable physique and the national defects of concave chests and bow legs. The lack of complexion and of hair upon the face makes it nearly impossible to judge of the ages of men. I supposed that all the railroad officials were striplings of 17 or 18, but they are men from 25 to 40 years old. It was a beautiful day, like an English June day, but hotter, and though the sakura, wild cherry, and its kin, which are the glory of the Japanese spring, are over, everything is a young, fresh green yet, and in all the beauty of growth and luxuriance. The immediate neighborhood of Yokohama is beautiful, with abrupt wooden hills and small picturesque valleys, but after passing Kanagawa, the railroad enters upon the immense plain of Yedo, said to be 90 miles from north to south, on whose northern and western boundaries faint blue mountains of great height hovered dreamily in the blue haze, and on whose eastern shore for many miles the clear blue wavelets of the Gulf of Yedo ripple, always as then brightened by the white sails of innumerable fishing boats. On this fertile and fruitful plain stand not only the capital with its million of inhabitants, but a number of populous cities and several hundred thriving agricultural villages. Every foot of land which can be seen from the railroad is cultivated by the most careful spade husbandry, and much of it is irrigated for rice. Streams abound, and villages of grey wooden houses with grey thatch, and grey temples with strangely curved roofs are scattered thickly over the landscape. It is all home-like, liveable, and pretty, the country of an industrious people, for not a weed is to be seen, but no very striking features or peculiarities arrest one at first sight, unless it be the crowds everywhere. You don't take your ticket for Tokyo, but for Shinagawa or Shinbashi, two of the main villages which have grown together into the capital. Yedo is hardly seen before Shinagawa is reached, for it has no smoke and no long chimneys. Its temples and public buildings are seldom lofty. The former are often concealed among thick trees, and its ordinary houses seldom reach a height of 20 feet. On the right, a blue sea with fortified islands upon it, wooded gardens with massive retaining walls, hundreds of fishing boats lying in creeks or drawn up on the beach. On the left, a broad road on which kurumas are hurrying both ways, rows of low, grey houses, mostly tea houses and shops. And as I was asking, "Where is Yedo?" the train came to rest in the terminus, the Shinbashi Railroad Station, and disgorged its 200 Japanese passengers with a combined clatter of 400 clogs, a new sound to me. These clogs add 3 inches to their height, but even with them few of the men attained 5 feet 7 inches, and few of the women 5 feet 2 inches, but they look far broader in the national costume, which also conceals the defects of their figures. So lean, so yellow, so ugly, yet so pleasant-looking, so wanting in colour and effectiveness, the women so very small and tottering in their walk, the children so formal-looking, and such dignified burlesques on the adults, I feel as if I had seen them all before, so like are they to their pictures on trays, fans, and teapots. The hair of the women is all drawn away from their faces, and is worn in chignons, and the men, when they don't shave the front of their heads and gather back their hair into a quaint queue drawn forward over the shaven patch, wear their coarse hair about 3 inches long in a refractory undivided mop. Davies, an orderly from the legation, met me, one of the escort cut down and severely wounded when Sir H. Parkes was attacked in the street of Kyoto in March 1868, on his way to his first audience of the Mikado. Hundreds of kurumas and covered carts with 4 wheels drawn by one miserable horse, which are the omnibuses of certain districts of Tokyo, were waiting outside the station, and an English brougham, for me, with a running betto. The legation stands in Kojimachi on very elevated ground above the inner moat of the historic castle of Yedo, but I cannot tell you anything of what I saw on my way thither, except that there were miles of dark, silent, barrack-like buildings with highly ornamental gateways, and long rows of projecting windows with screens made of reeds, the feudal mansions of Yedo, and miles of moats with lofty grass embankments, or walls of massive masonry 50 feet high, with kiosk-like towers at the corners, and curious roofed gateways, and many bridges and acres of lotus leaves. Turning along the inner moat, up a steep slope, There are, on the right, its deep green waters, the great grass embankment surmounted by a dismal wall overhung by the branches of coniferous trees which surrounded the palace of the shogun, and on the left sundry yashikis, as the mansions of the daimyos were called, now in this quarter mostly turned into hospitals, barracks, and government offices. On a height, the most conspicuous of them all is the great red gateway of the yashiki, now occupied by the French military mission, formerly the residence of I Kamon no Kami, one of the great actors in recent historic events, who was assassinated not far off, outside the Sakaruda gate of the castle. Besides these, barracks, parade grounds, policemen, kurumas, carts pulled and pushed by coolies, pack horses in straw sandals, and dwarfish, slatternly-looking soldiers in European dress, made up the Tokyo that I saw between Shinbashi and the legation. HBM's legation has a good situation near the Foreign Office, several of the government departments, and the residences of the ministers, which are chiefly of brick in the English suburban villa style. Within the compound, with a brick archway with the royal arms upon it for an entrance, are the minister's residence, the chancery, 2 houses for the 2 English secretaries of legation, and quarters for the escort. It is an English house and an English home, though with the exception of a venerable nurse there are no English servants. The butler and footmen are tall Chinamen with long pigtails, black satin caps, and long blue robes. The cook is a Chinaman, and the other servants are all Japanese, including 1 female servant, a sweet, gentle, kindly girl of about 4 feet 5 in height, the wife of the head housemaid. None of the servants speak anything but the most aggravating pidgin English, but their deficient speech is more than made up for by the intelligence and service of the orderly-in-waiting, who is rarely absent from the neighborhood of the hall door and attends to the visitor's book and to all messages and notes. There are 2 real English children of 6 and 7, with great capacities for such innocent enjoyments as can be found within the limits of the nursery and garden. The other inmate of the house is a beautiful and attractive terrier called Rags, a sky dog who unbends in the bosom of his family, but ordinarily is as imposing in his demeanor as if he, and not his master, represented the dignity of the British Empire. The Japanese Secretary of Legation is Mr. Ernest Sato, whose reputation for scholarship, especially in the department of history, is said by the Japanese themselves to be the highest in Japan, an honorable distinction for an Englishman, and won by the persevering industry of 15 years. The scholarship connected with the British civil service is not, however, monopolized by Mr. Sato, for several gentlemen in the consular service, who are passing through the various grades of student interpreters, are distinguishing themselves not alone by their facility in colloquial Japanese, but by their researches in various departments of Japanese history, mythology, archaeology, and literature. Indeed, it is to their labors, and to those of a few other Englishmen and Germans, that the Japanese of the rising generation will be indebted for keeping alive not only the knowledge of their archaic literature, but even of the manners and customs of the first half of this century. HBM's Legation, Yedo, June 7th. I went to Yokohama for a week to visit Dr. and Mrs. Hepburn on the Bluff. Bishop and Mrs. Burden of Hong Kong were also guests, and it was very pleasant. One cannot be a day in Yokohama without seeing quite a different class of Orientals from the small, thinly dressed, and usually poor-looking Japanese. Of the 2,500 Chinamen who reside in Japan, over 1,100 are in Yokohama, and if they were suddenly removed, business would come to an abrupt halt. Here, as everywhere, the Chinese immigrant is making himself indispensable. He walks through the streets with his swinging gait and air of complete self-complacency, as though he belonged to the ruling race. He is tall and big, and his many garments, with a handsome brocaded robe over all, His satin pantaloons, of which not much is seen, tight at the ankles, and his high shoes, whose black satin tops are slightly turned up at the toes, make him look even taller and bigger than he is. His head is mostly shaven, but the hair at the back is plaited with a quantity of black purse twist into a queue which reaches to his knees, above which, set well back, he wears a stiff black satin skull cap, without which he is never seen. His face is very yellow, his long dark eyes and eyebrows slope upwards towards his temples, he has not the vestige of a beard, and his skin is shiny. He looks thoroughly well-to-do. He is not unpleasant looking, but you feel that as a celestial he looks down upon you. If you ask a question in a merchant's office, or change your gold into satsu, or take your railroad or steamer ticket, or get change in a shop, the inevitable Chinaman appears. In the street he swings past you with a purpose in his face. As he flies past you in a kuruma, he is bent on business. He is sober and reliable, and is content to squeeze his employer rather than to rob him. His one aim in life is money. For this he is industrious, faithful, self-denying, and he has his reward. Several of my kind new acquaintances interested themselves about the, to me, vital matter of a servant interpreter, and many Japanese came to see after the place. The speaking of intelligible English is a sine qua non, and it was wonderful to find the few words badly pronounced and worse put together, which were regarded by the candidates as a sufficient qualification. Can you speak English? Yes. What wages do you ask? $12 a month. This was always said glibly, and in each case sounded hopeful. Whom have you lived with? A foreign name distorted out of all recognition, as was natural, was then given. Where have you traveled? This question usually had to be translated into Japanese, and the usual answer was the Hokkaido, the Nakasendo, to Kyoto, to Nikko, naming the beaten tracks of countless tourists. Do you know anything of northern Japan and the Hokkaido? No, with a blank, wondering look. At this stage in every case, Dr. Hepburn compassionately stepped in as interpreter, for their stock of English was exhausted. 3 were regarded as promising. One was a sprightly youth who came in a well-made European suit of light-colored tweed, a laid-down collar, a tie with a diamond pin, and a white shirt so stiffly starched that he could hardly bend low enough for a bow even of European profundity. He wore a gilt watch chain with a locket, the corner of a very wide cambric pocket handkerchief dangled from his breast pocket, and he held a cane and a felt hat in his hand. He was a Japanese dandy of the first water. I looked at him ruefully. To me, starched collars are to be an unknown luxury for the next 3 months. His fine foreign clothes would enhance prices everywhere in the interior, and besides that, I should feel a perpetual difficulty in asking menial services from an exquisite. I was therefore quite relieved when his English broke down at the second question. The second was a most respectable-looking man of 35 in a good Japanese dress. He was highly recommended, and his first English words were promising, but he had been cook in the service of a wealthy English official who travelled with a large retinue, and sent servants on ahead to prepare the way. He knew really only a few words of English, and his horror at finding that there was no master, and that there would be no woman servant, was so great that I hardly know whether he rejected me or I him. The third, sent by Mr. Wilkinson, wore a plain Japanese dress, and had a frank, intelligent face. Though Dr. Hepburn spoke with him in Japanese, he thought that he knew more English than the others, and that what he knew would come out when he was less agitated. He evidently understood what I said, and, though I had a suspicion that he would turn out to be the master, I thought him so prepossessing that I nearly engaged him on the spot. None of the others merit any remark. However, when I had nearly made up my mind in his favour, a creature appeared without any recommendation at all, except that one of Dr. Hepburn's servants was acquainted with him. He is only 18, but this is equivalent to 23 or 24 with us, and only 4 feet 10 inches in height, but, though bandy-legged, is well-proportioned and strong-looking. He has a round and singularly plain face, good teeth, much elongated eyes, and the heavy droop of his eyelids almost caricatures the usual Japanese peculiarity. He is the most stupid-looking Japanese that I have seen, but from a rapid, furtive glance in his eyes now and then, I think that the stolidity is partly assumed. He said that he had lived at the American legation, that he had been a clerk on the Osaka Railroad, that he had traveled through northern Japan by the eastern route, and in Yezo with Mr. Maries, a botanical collector, that he understood drying plants, that he could cook a little, that he could write English, that he could walk 25 miles a day, and that he thoroughly understood getting through the interior. This would-be paragon had no recommendations and accounted for this by saying that they had been burned in a recent fire in his father's house. Mr. Maries was not forthcoming, and more than this, I suspected and disliked the boy. However, he understood my English, and I his, and, being very anxious to begin my travels, I engaged him for $12 a month, and soon afterwards he came back with a contract in which he declares by all that he holds most sacred that he will serve me faithfully for the wages agreed upon, and to this document he affixed his seal, and I my name. The next day he asked me for a month's wages in advance, which I gave him, but Dr. Hepburn consolingly suggested that I should never see him again. Ever since the solemn night when the contract was signed, I have felt under an incubus, and since he appeared here yesterday, punctual to the appointed hour, I have felt as if I had a veritable old man of the sea upon my shoulders. He flies upstairs and along the corridors as noiselessly as a cat, and already knows where I keep all my things. Nothing surprises or abashes him. He bows profoundly to Sir Harry and Lady Parkes when he encounters them, but is obviously quite at home in a legation, and only allowed one of the orderlies to show him how to put on a Mexican saddle and English bridle out of condescension to my wishes. He seems as sharp or as smart as can be, and has already arranged for the first 3 days of my journey. His name is Ito, and you will doubtless hear much more of him, as he will be my good or evil genius for the next 3 months. As no English lady has yet travelled alone through the interior, my project excites a very friendly interest among my friends, and I receive much warning and dissuasion, and a little encouragement. The strongest, because the most intelligent, dissuasion comes from Dr. Hepburn, who thinks that I ought not to undertake the journey, and that I shall never get through to the Tsugaru Strait. If I accepted much of the advice given to me, as to taking tinned meats and soups, claret and a Japanese maid, I should need a train of at least 6 pack horses. As to fleas, there is a lamentable consensus of opinion that they are the curse of Japanese travelling during the summer, and some people recommend me to sleep in a bag drawn tightly round the throat, others to sprinkle my bedding freely with insect powder, others to smear the skin all over with carbolic oil, and some to make a plentiful use of dried and powdered fleabane. All admit, however, that these are but feeble palliatives. Hammocks, unfortunately, cannot be used in Japanese houses. The food question is said to be the most important one for all travellers, and it is discussed continually with startling earnestness, not alone as regards my tour. However apathetic people are on other subjects, the mere mention of this one rouses them to interest. All have suffered or may suffer, and everyone wishes to impart his own experiences or to learn from that of others. Foreign ministers, professors, missionaries, merchants, all discuss it with becoming gravity as a question of life and death, which by many it is supposed to be. The fact is that except at a few hotels in popular resorts, which are got up for foreigners, bread, butter, milk, meat, poultry, coffee, wine, and beer are unattainable, that fresh fish is rare, and that unless one can live on rice, tea, and eggs, with the addition now and then of some tasteless fresh vegetables, food must be taken, as the fishy and vegetable abominations known as Japanese food can only be swallowed and digested by a few, and that after a long practice. Another, but far inferior difficulty on which much stress is laid, is the practice common among native servants of getting a squeeze out of every money transaction on the road, so that the cost of travelling is often doubled and sometimes trebled, according to the skill and capacity of the servant. 3 gentlemen who have travelled extensively have given me lists of the prices which I ought to pay, varying in different districts, and largely increased on the beaten track of tourists, and Mr. Wilkinson has read these to Ito, who offered an occasional remonstrance. Mr. Wilkinson remarked after the conversation, which was in Japanese, that he thought I should have to look sharp after money matters, a painful prospect, as I have never been able to manage anybody in my life, and shall surely have no control over this clever, cunning Japanese youth, who on most points will be able to deceive me as he pleases. On returning here, I found that Lady Parkes had made most of the necessary preparations for me, and that they include 2 light baskets with covers of oiled paper, a travelling bed or stretcher, a folding chair, and an India rubber bath, all which she considers as necessaries for a person in feeble health on a journey of such long duration. This week has been spent in making acquaintances in Tokyo, seeing some characteristic sights, and in trying to get light on my tour, but little seems known by foreigners of northern Japan, and a government department, on being applied to, returned an itinerary, leaving out 140 miles of the route that I dream of taking, on the ground of insufficient information, on which Sir Harry cheerily remarked, "You will have to get your information as you go along, and that will be all the more interesting." Ah, but how? ILB. End of letter 4. Letter 5. HBM's Legation, Yedo, June 9. Once for all, I will describe a Buddhist temple, and it shall be the popular temple of Asakusa, which keeps fair and festival the whole year round, and is dedicated to the 1,000-armed Kwannon, the goddess of mercy. Writing generally, it may be said that in design, roof, and general aspect, Japanese Buddhist temples are all alike. The sacred architectural idea expresses itself in nearly the same form always. There is a single or double-roofed gateway, with highly colored figures in niches on either side. The paved temple court, with more or fewer stone or bronze lanterns. Ainu, or heavenly dogs, in stone on stone pedestals. Stone sarcophagi, roofed over or not, for holy water. A flight of steps, a portico continued as a veranda all round the temple. A roof of tremendously disproportionate size and weight, with a peculiar curve. A square or oblong hall divided by a railing from a chancel with a high and low altar, and a shrine containing Buddha, or the divinity to whom the chapel is dedicated, an incense burner, and a few ecclesiastical ornaments. The symbols, idols, and adornments depend upon the sect to which the temple belongs, or the wealth of its votaries, or the fancy of the priests. Some temples are packed full of gods, shrines, banners, bronzes, brasses, tablets, and ornaments, and others, like those of the Monto sect, are so severely simple that with scarcely an alteration they might be used for Christian worship tomorrow. The foundations consist of square stones on which the uprights rest. These are of elm and are united at intervals by longitudinal pieces. The great size and enormous weight of the roofs arise from the trusses being formed of one heavy framed being built upon another in diminishing squares till the top is reached, the main beams being formed of very large timbers put on in their natural state. They are either very heavily and ornamentally tiled, or covered with sheet copper ornamented with gold, or thatched to a depth of from 1 to 3 feet, with fine shingles or bark. The casing of the walls on the outside is usually thick elm planking, either lacquered or unpainted, and that of the inside is of thin, finely planed and beveled planking of the beautiful wood of the Retinospora obtusa. The lining of the roof is in flat panels, and where it is supported by pillars, they are invariably circular, and formed of the straight, finely grained stem of the Retinospora obtusa. The projecting ends of the roof beams under the eaves are either elaborately carved, lacquered in dull red, or covered with copper, as are the joints of the beams. Very few nails are used, the timbers being very beautifully joined by mortices and dovetails, other methods of junction being unknown. Mr. Chamberlain and I went in a kuruma hurried along by 3 liveried coolies through the 3 miles of crowded streets which lie between the Legation and Asakusa, once a village, but now incorporated with this monster city, to the broad street leading to the Atsuma Bridge over the Sumida River, one of the few stone bridges in Tokyo, which connects East Tokyo, an uninteresting region, containing many canals, storehouses, timber yards, and inferior yashikis, with the rest of the city. This street, marvelously thronged with pedestrians and kurumas, is the terminus of a number of city stage lines, and 20 wretched-looking covered wagons, with still more wretched ponies, were drawn up in the middle, waiting for passengers. Just there, plenty of real Tokyo life is to be seen, for near a shrine of popular pilgrimage there are always numerous places of amusement, innocent and vicious, and the vicinity of this temple is full of restaurants, tea-houses, minor theatres, and the resorts of dancing and singing girls. A broad paved avenue, only open to foot passengers, leads from this street to the grand entrance, a colossal 2-storied double-roofed mon or gate, painted a rich dull red. On either side of this avenue are lines of booths, which make a brilliant and lavish display of their contents: toy shops, shops for smoking apparatus, and shops for the sale of ornamental hairpins predominating. Nearer the gate are booths for the sale of rosaries for prayer, sleeve and bosom idols of brass and wood in small shrines, amulet bags, representations of the jolly-looking Daikoku, the god of wealth, the most popular of the household gods of Japan, shrines, memorial tablets, cheap ex-votos, sacred bells, candlesticks, and incense burners, and all the endless and various articles connected with Buddhist devotion, public and private. Every day is a festival day at Asakusa. The temple is dedicated to the most popular of the great divinities. It is the most popular of religious resorts, and whether he be Buddhist, Shintoist, or Christian, no stranger comes to the capital without making a visit to its crowded courts or a purchase at its tempting booths. Not to be an exception, I invested in bouquets of firework flowers, 50 flowers for 2 sen, or 1 penny, each of which, as it slowly consumes, throws off fiery coruscations, shaped like the most beautiful of snow crystals. I was also tempted by small boxes at 2 sen each, containing what look like little slips of withered pith, but which, on being dropped into water, expand into trees and flowers. Down a paved passage on the right there is an artificial river, not over clean, with a bridge formed of one curved stone, from which a flight of steps leads up to a small temple with a magnificent bronze bell. At the entrance several women were praying. In the same direction are 2 fine bronze Buddhas, seated figures, one with clasped hands, the other holding a lotus, both with "the light of the world" upon their brows. The grand red gateway into the actual temple courts has an extremely imposing effect, And besides, it is the portal to the first great heathen temple that I have seen, and it made me think of another temple whose courts were equally crowded with buyers and sellers, and of a whip of small cords in the hand of one who claimed both the temple and its courts as his father's house. Not with less righteous wrath would the gentle founder of Buddhism purify the unsanctified courts of Asakusa. Hundreds of men, women, and children passed to and fro through the gateway in incessant streams, and so they are passing through every daylight hour of every day in the year, thousands becoming tens of thousands on the great Matsuri days, when the mikoshi, or sacred car, containing certain symbols of the god, is exhibited, and, after sacred mimes and dances have been performed, is carried in a magnificent antique procession to the shore and back again. Under the gateway on either side are the Nio, or two kings, gigantic figures in flowing robes, one red and with an open mouth, representing the Yo, or male principle of Chinese philosophy, the other green and with the mouth firmly closed, representing the In, or female principle. They are hideous creatures with protruding eyes, and faces and figures distorted and corrupted into a high degree of exaggerated and convulsive action. These figures guard the gates of most of the larger temples, and small prints of them are pasted over the doors of houses to protect them against burglars. Attached to the grating in front were a number of straw sandals, hung up by people who pray that their limbs may be as muscular as those of the Nio. Passing through this gate, we were in the temple court proper, and in front of the temple itself, a building of imposing height and size, of a dull red color, with a grand roof of heavy iron grey tiles, with a sweeping curve which gives grace as well as grandeur. The timbers and supports are solid and of great size, but, in common with all Japanese temples, whether Buddhist or Shinto, the edifice is entirely of wood. A broad flight of narrow, steep, brass-bound steps lead up to the porch, which is formed by a number of circular pillars supporting a very lofty roof, from which paper lanterns 10 feet long are hanging. A gallery runs from this round the temple, under cover of the eaves. There is an outer temple, unmatted, and an inner one behind a grating, into which those who choose to pay for the privilege of praying in comparative privacy, or of having prayers said for them by the priests, can pass. In the outer temple the noise, confusion, and perpetual motion are bewildering. Crowds on clattering clogs pass in and out, pigeons, of which hundreds live in the porch, fly over your head, and the whirring of their wings mingles with the tinkling of bells, the beating of drums and gongs, the high-pitched drone of the priests, the low murmur of prayers, the rippling laughter of girls, the harsh voices of men, and the general buzz of a multitude. There is very much that is highly grotesque at first sight. Men squat on the floor selling amulets, rosaries, printed prayers, incense sticks, and other wares. Ex-votos of all kinds hang on the wall and on the great round pillars. Many of these are rude Japanese pictures. The subject of one is the blowing up of a steamer in the Sumidagawa with the loss of 100 lives, when the donor was saved by the grace of Kwannon. Numbers of memorials are from people who offered up prayers here and have been restored to health or wealth. Others are from junkmen whose lives have been in peril. There are scores of men's queues and a few dusty braids of women's hair offered on account of vows or prayers, usually for sick relatives, and among them all, on the left hand, are a large mirror in a gaudily gilt frame and a framed picture of the PMS China. Above this incongruous collection are splendid wood carvings and frescoes of angels, among which the pigeons find a home free from molestation. Near the entrance there is a superb incense burner in the most massive style of the older bronzes, with a mythical beast rampant upon it, and in high relief round it the Japanese signs of the zodiac: the rat, ox, tiger, rabbit, dragon, serpent, horse, goat, monkey, cock, dog, and hog. Clouds of incense rise continually from the perforations round the edge, and a black-toothed woman who keeps it burning is perpetually receiving small coins from the worshippers, who then pass on to the front of the altar to pray. The high altar, and indeed all that I should regard as properly the temple, are protected by a screen of coarsely netted iron wire. This holy of holies is full of shrines and gods, gigantic candlesticks, colossal lotuses of gilded silver, offerings, lamps, lacquer, litany books, gongs, drums, bells, and all the mysterious symbols of a faith which is a system of morals and metaphysics to the educated and initiated, and an idolatrous superstition to the masses. In this interior the light was dim, the lamps burned low, the atmosphere was heavy with incense, and amidst its fumes shaven priests in chasubles and stoles moved noiselessly over the soft matting round the high altar on which Kwannon is enshrined, lighting candles, striking bells, and murmuring prayers. In front of the screen is the treasury, a wooden chest 14 feet by 10, with a deep slit, into which all the worshippers cast copper coins with a ceaseless clinking sound. There, too, they pray, if that can be called prayer which frequently consists only in the repetition of an uncomprehended phrase in a foreign tongue, bowing the head, raising the hands and rubbing them, murmuring a few words, telling beads, clapping the hands, bowing again, and then passing out or on to another shrine to repeat the same form. Merchants in silk clothing, soldiers in shabby French uniforms, farmers, coolies in vile raiment, mothers, maidens, swells in European clothes, even the samurai policemen, bow before the goddess of mercy. Most of the prayers were offered rapidly, a mere momentary interlude in the gurgle of ceaseless talk, and without a pretense of reverence, but some of the petitioners obviously brought real woes in simple faith. In one shrine there is a large idol, spotted all over with pellets of paper, and hundreds of these are sticking to the wire netting which protects him. A worshipper writes his petition on a paper, or, better still, has it written for him by the priest, chews it to a pulp, and spits it at the divinity. If, having been well aimed, it passes through the wire and sticks, it is a good omen. If it lodges in the netting, the prayer has probably been unheard. The Neo and some of the gods outside the temple are similarly disfigured. On the left there is a shrine with a screen, to the bars of which innumerable prayers have been tied. On the right, accessible to all, sits Binzuru, one of Buddha's original 16 disciples. His face and appearance have been calm and amiable, with something of the quiet dignity of an elderly country gentleman of the reign of George III, but he is now worn and defaced, and has not much more of eyes, nose, and mouth than the Sphinx, and the polished red lacquer has disappeared from his hands and feet, for Binzuru is a great medicine god, and centuries of sick people have rubbed his face and limbs, and then have rubbed their own. A young woman went up to him, rubbed the back of his neck, and then rubbed her own. Then a modest-looking girl, leading an ancient woman with badly inflamed eyelids and paralyzed arms, rubbed his eyelids, and then gently stroked the closed eyelids of the crone. Then a coolie, with a swelled knee, applied himself vigorously to Binzuru's knee, and more gently to his own. Remember, this is the great temple of the populace, and not many rich, not many noble, not many mighty, enter its dim, dirty, crowded halls. But the great temple of Kwannon is not the only site of Asakusa. Outside it are countless shrines and temples, huge stone Ainu, or heavenly dogs, on rude blocks of stone, large cisterns of stone and bronze with and without canopies, containing water for the ablutions of the worshippers, cast iron Ainu on hewn stone pedestals, a recent gift, bronze and stone lanterns, a stone prayer wheel in a stone post, figures of Buddha with the serene countenance of one who rests from his labors, stone idols on which devotees have pasted slips of paper inscribed with prayers, with sticks of incense rising out of the ashes of hundreds of former sticks smouldering before them, blocks of hewn stone with Chinese and Sanskrit inscriptions, an 8-sided temple in which are figures of the 500 disciples of Buddha, a temple with the roof and upper part of the walls richly colored, the circular Shinto mirror in an inner shrine, a bronze treasury outside with a bell which is rung to attract the god's attention, a striking 5-storied pagoda with much red lacquer and the ends of the roof beams very boldly carved, its heavy eaves fringed with wind bells, and its uppermost roof terminating in a graceful copper spiral of great height, with the sacred pearl surrounded by flames for its finial. Near it, as near most temples, is an upright frame of plain wood with tablets, on which are inscribed the names of donors to the temple, and the amount of their gifts. There is a handsome stone-floored table to the southeast of the main building, to which we were the sole visitors. It is lofty and very richly decorated. In the center is an octagonal revolving room, or rather shrine, of rich red lacquer most gorgeously ornamented. It rests on a frame of carved black lacquer and has a lacquer gallery running round it, on which several richly decorated doors open. On the application of several shoulders to this gallery, the shrine rotates. It is, in fact, a revolving library of the Buddhist scriptures, and a single turn is equivalent to a single pious perusal of them. It is an exceedingly beautiful specimen of ancient decorative lacquer work. At the back part of the temple is a draped brass figure of Buddha, with one hand raised, a dignified piece of casting. All the Buddhas have Hindu features, and the graceful drapery and oriental repose which have been imported from India contrast singularly with the grotesque extravagances of the indigenous Japanese conceptions. In the same temple are 4 monstrously extravagant figures carved in wood, life-size, with clawed toes on their feet, and 2 great fangs in addition to the teeth in each mouth. The heads of all are surrounded with flames and are backed by golden circlets. They are extravagantly clothed in garments which look as if they were agitated by a violent wind. They wear helmets and partial suits of armor, and hold in their right hands something between a monarch's scepter and a priest's staff. They have goggle eyes and open mouths, and their faces are in distorted and exaggerated action. One, painted bright red, tramples on a writhing devil painted bright pink. Another, painted emerald green, tramples on a sea-green devil. An indigo blue monster tramples on a sky-blue fiend, and a bright pink monster treads under his clawed feet a flesh-colored demon. I cannot give you any idea of the hideousness of their aspect, and was much inclined to sympathize with the more innocent-looking fiends whom they were maltreating. They occur very frequently in Buddhist temples, and are said by some to be assistant torturers to Yema, the Lord of Hell, and are called by others the gods of the 4 quarters. The temple grounds are a most extraordinary sight. No English fair in the palmiest days of fairs ever presented such an array of attractions. Behind the temple are archery galleries in numbers, where girls, hardly so modest-looking as usual, smile and smirk, and bring straw-colored tea in dainty cups, and tasteless sweetmeats on lacquer trays, and smoke their tiny pipes, and offer you bows of slender bamboo strips 2 feet long, with rests for the arrows, and tiny cherry-wood arrows, bone-tipped and feathered red, blue, and white, and smilingly, but quite unobtrusively, ask you to try your skill, or luck, at a target hanging in front of a square drum, flanked by red cushions. A click, a boom, or a hardly audible thud indicate the result. Nearly all the archers were grown-up men, and many of them spent hours at a time in this childish sport. All over the grounds, booths with the usual charcoal fire, copper boiler, iron kettle of curious workmanship, tiny cups, fragrant aroma of tea, and winsome, graceful girls invite you to drink and rest, and more solid but less inviting refreshments are also to be had. Rows of pretty paper lanterns decorate all the stalls. Then there are photograph galleries, mimic tea gardens, tableaux in which a large number of groups of life-size figures with appropriate scenery are put into motion by a creaking wheel of great size, matted lounges for rest, stands with saucers of rice, beans and peas for offering to the gods, the pigeons, and the two sacred horses, albino ponies with pink eyes and noses, revoltingly greedy creatures, eating all day long and still craving for more. There are booths for singing and dancing, and under one a professional storyteller was reciting to a densely packed crowd one of the old popular stories of crime. There are booths where for a few rin you may have the pleasure of feeding some very ugly and greedy apes, or of watching mangy monkeys which have been taught to prostrate themselves Japanese fashion. This letter is far too long, but to pass over Asakusa and its novelties when the impression of them is still fresh would be to omit one of the most interesting sights in Japan. On the way back, we passed red mail carts like those in London, a squadron of cavalry in European uniforms and with European saddles, and the carriage of the Minister of Marine, an English brougham with a pair of horses in English harness, and an escort of 6 troopers, a painful precaution, adopted since the political assassination of Okubo, the Home Minister, 3 weeks ago. So the old and the new in this great city contrast with and jostle each other. The Mikado and his ministers, naval and military officers and men, the whole of the civil officers and the police, wear European clothes, as well as a number of dissipated-looking young men who aspire to represent young Japan. Carriages and houses in English style, with carpets, chairs, and tables, are becoming increasingly numerous, and the bad taste which regulates the purchase of foreign furnishings is as marked as the good taste which everywhere presides over the adornment of the houses in purely Japanese style. Happily, these expensive and unbecoming innovations have scarcely affected female dress, and some ladies who adopted our fashions have given them up because of their discomfort and manifold difficulties and complications. The Empress on state occasions appears in scarlet satin hakama and flowing robes, and she and the court ladies invariably wear the national costume. I have only seen 2 ladies in European dress, and this was at a dinner party here, and they were the wives of Mr. Mori, the go-ahead Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs, and of the Japanese consul at Hong Kong, and both by long residence abroad have learned to wear it with ease. The wife of Saigo, the Minister of Education, called one day in an exquisite Japanese dress of dove-colored silk crepe, with a pale pink underdress of the same material, which showed a little at the neck and sleeves. Her girdle was of rich dove-colored silk, with a ghost of a pale pink blossom hovering upon it here and there. She had no frills or fripperies of any description, or ornaments, except a single pin in her chignon, and, with a sweet and charming face, she looked as graceful and dignified in her Japanese costume as she would have looked exactly the reverse in ours. Their costume has one striking advantage over ours. A woman is perfectly clothed if she has one garment and a girdle on, and perfectly dressed if she has 2. There is a difference in features and expression, much exaggerated, however, by Japanese artists, between the faces of high-born women and those of the middle and lower classes. I decline to admire fat faces, pug noses, thick lips, long eyes, turned up at the outer corners, and complexions which owe much to powder and paint. The habit of painting the lips with a reddish-yellow pigment and of heavily powdering the face and throat with pearl powder is a repulsive one. But it is hard to pronounce any unfavorable criticism on women who have so much kindly grace of manner. Letter 6, Part 1. Kasukabe, June 10th. From the date you will see that I have started on my long journey, though not upon the unbeaten tracks which I hope to take after leaving Nikko, and my first evening alone in the midst of this crowded Asian life is strange, almost fearful. I have suffered from nervousness all day, the fear of being frightened, of being rudely mobbed, as threatened by Mr. Campbell of Islay, of giving offense by transgressing the rules of Japanese politeness, of I know not what. Ito is my sole reliance, and he may prove a broken reed. I often wished to give up my project, but was ashamed of my cowardice when, on the best authority, I received assurances of its safety. The preparations were finished yesterday, and my outfit weighed 110 pounds, which, with Ito's weight of 90 pounds, is as much as can be carried by an average Japanese horse. My 2 painted wicker boxes lined with paper and with waterproof covers are convenient for the 2 sides of a pack-horse. I have a folding chair, for in a Japanese house there is nothing but the floor to sit upon, and not even a solid wall to lean against, an air pillow for kuruma traveling, an India rubber bath, sheets, a blanket, and last and more important than all else, a canvas stretcher on light poles, which can be put together in 2 minutes, and being 2½ feet high is supposed to be secure from fleas. The food question has been solved by a modified rejection of all advice. I have only brought a small supply of Liebig's extract of meat, 4 pounds of raisins, some chocolate, both for eating and drinking, and some brandy in case of need. I have my own Mexican saddle and bridle, a reasonable quantity of clothes, including a loose wrapper for wearing in the evenings, some candles, Mr. Brunton's large map of Japan, volumes of the Transactions of the English Asiatic Society, and Mr. Sato's Anglo-Japanese Dictionary. My travelling dress is a short costume of dust-coloured striped tweed, with long laced boots of unblacked leather, and a Japanese hat, shaped like a large inverted bowl, of light bamboo plate, with a white cotton cover and a very light frame inside, which fits round the brow and leaves a space of 1½ inches between the hat and the head for the free circulation of air. It only weighs 2½ ounces, and is infinitely to be preferred to a heavy pith helmet, and, light as it is, it protects the head so thoroughly that, though the sun has been unclouded all day and the mercury at 86 degrees, no other protection has been necessary. My money is in bundles of 50 yen and 50, 20, and 10-sen notes, besides which I have some rouleaux of copper coins. I have a bag for my passport which hangs to my waist. All my luggage, with the exception of my saddle which I use for a footstool, goes into 1 kuruma, and Ito, who is limited to 12 pounds, takes his along with him. I have 3 kurumas, which are to go to Nikko, 90 miles, in 3 days, without change of runners, for about 11 shillings each. Passports usually define the route over which the foreigner is to travel, but in this case Sir H. Parkes has obtained one which is practically unrestricted, for it permits me to travel through all Japan north of Tokyo and in Yezo without specifying any route. This precious document, without which I should be liable to be arrested and forwarded to my consul, is of course in Japanese, but the cover gives in English the regulations under which it is issued. A passport must be applied for reasons of health, botanical research, or scientific investigation. Its bearer must not light fires in woods, attend fires on horseback, trespass on fields, enclosures, or game preserves, scribble on temples, shrines, or walls, drive fast on a narrow road, or disregard notices of no thoroughfare. He must conduct himself in an orderly and conciliating manner towards the Japanese authorities and people. He must produce his passport to any officials who may demand it, under pain of arrest, and while in the interior, is forbidden to shoot, trade, to conclude mercantile contracts with Japanese, or to rent houses or rooms for a longer period than his journey requires. Nikko, June 13. This is one of the paradises of Japan. It is a proverbial saying, "He who has not seen Nikko must not use the word kekko," splendid, delicious, beautiful. But of this more hereafter. My attempt to write to you from Kasukabe failed, owing to the onslaught of an army of fleas which compelled me to retreat to my stretcher, and the last 2 nights, for this and other reasons, writing has been out of the question. I left the legation at 11 a.m. on Monday and reached Kasukabe at 5 p.m., the runners keeping up an easy trot the whole journey of 23 miles, but the halts for smoking and eating were frequent. These kuruma runners wore short blue cotton drawers, girdles with tobacco pouch and pipe attached, short blue cotton shirts with wide sleeves and open in front, reaching to their waists, and blue cotton handkerchiefs knotted round their heads, except when the sun was very hot, when they took the flat flag discs, 2 feet in diameter, which always hang behind kurumas, and are used either in sun or rain, and tied them on their heads. They wore straw sandals, which had to be replaced twice on the way. Blue and white towels hung from the shafts to wipe away the sweat, which ran profusely down the lean brown bodies. The upper garment always flew behind them, displaying chests and backs elaborately tattooed with dragons and fishes. Tattooing has been recently prohibited, but it was not only a favorite adornment, but a substitute for perishable clothing. Most of the men of the lower classes wear their hair in a very ugly fashion, the front and top of the head being shaved, the long hair from the back and sides being drawn up and tied, then waxed, tied again, and cut short off, the stiff queue being brought forward and laid, pointing forwards, along the back part of the top of the head. This top knot is shaped much like a short clay pipe. The shaving and dressing the hair thus required the skill of a professional barber. Formerly the hair was worn in this way by the samurai, in order that the helmet might fit comfortably, but it is now the style of the lower classes mostly, and by no means invariably. Blithely at a merry trot, the coolies hurried us away from the kindly group in the legation porch, across the inner moat and along the inner drive of the castle, past gateways and retaining walls of cyclopean masonry, across the second moat, along miles of streets of sheds and shops, all grey, thronged with foot passengers and kurumas, with pack horses loaded 2 or 3 feet above their backs, the arches of their saddles red and gilded lacquer, the frontlets of red leather, their shoes, straw sandals, their heads tied tightly to the saddle girth on either side, great white cloths figured with mythical beasts in blue hanging down loosely under their bodies, with coolies dragging heavy loads to the guttural cry of "Hai huida," with children whose heads were shaved in hideous patterns, and now and then, as if to point a moral lesson in the midst of the whirling diorama, a funeral passed through the throng, with a priest in rich robes, mumbling prayers, a covered barrel containing the corpse, and a train of mourners in blue dresses with white wings. Then we came to the fringe of Yedo, where the houses ceased to be continuous, but all that day there was little interval between them. All had open fronts, so that the occupations of the inmates, the domestic life, in fact, were perfectly visible. Many of these houses were roadside chayas, or tea houses, and nearly all sold sweetmeats, dried fish, pickles, mochi, or uncooked cakes of rice dough, dried persimmons, rain hats, or straw shoes for man or beast. The road, though wide enough for 2 carriages, of which we saw none, was not good, and the ditches on both sides were frequently neither clean nor sweet. Must I write it? The houses were mean, poor, shabby, often even squalid. The smells were bad, and the people looked ugly, shabby, and poor, though all were working at something or other. The country is a dead level, and mainly an artificial mudflat or swamp, in whose fertile ooze various aquatic birds were wading, and in which hundreds of men and women were wading too, above their knees in slush. For this plain of Yedo is mainly a great rice field, and this is the busy season of rice planting. For here, in the sense in which we understand it, they do not cast their bread upon the waters. There are 8 or 9 leading varieties of rice grown in Japan, all of which, except an upland species, require mud, water, and much puddling and nasty work. Rice is the staple food and the wealth of Japan. Its revenues were estimated in rice. Rice is grown almost wherever irrigation is possible. The rice fields are usually very small and of all shapes. 1/4 of an acre is a good-sized field. The rice crop planted in June is not reaped till November, but in the meantime it needs to be puddled 3 times, that is, for all the people to turn into the slush and grub out all the weeds and tangled aquatic plants, which weave themselves from tuft to tuft, and puddle up the mud afresh around the roots. It grows in water till it is ripe, when the fields are dried off. An acre of the best land produces annually about 54 bushels of rice, and the worst about 30. On the plain of Yedo, besides the nearly continuous villages along the causewayed road, there are islands, as they may be called, of villages surrounded by trees, and hundreds of pleasant oases on which wheat ready for the sickle, onions, millet, beans, and peas were flourishing. There were lotus ponds, too, in which the glorious lily, Nelumbo nucifera, is being grown for the sacrilegious purpose of being eaten. Its splendid classical leaves are already a foot above the water. After running cheerily for several miles, my men bowled me into a tea-house, where they ate and smoked, while I sat in the garden, which consisted of baked mud, smooth stepping stones, a little pond with some goldfish, a deformed pine, and a stone lantern. Observe that foreigners are wrong in calling the Japanese houses of entertainment indiscriminately tea-houses. A tea-house or chaya is a house at which you can obtain tea and other refreshments, rooms to eat them in, and attendance. That which to some extent answers to a hotel is a yadoya, which provides sleeping accommodation and food as required. The licenses are different. Tea-houses are of all grades, from the 3-storied erections, gay with flags and lanterns, in the great cities and at places of popular resort, down to the roadside tea-house as represented in the engraving, with 3 or 4 lounges of dark-colored wood under its eaves, usually occupied by naked coolies in all attitudes of easiness and repose. The floor is raised about 18 inches above the ground, and in these tea-houses is frequently a matted platform with a recess called the doma, literally earth space, in the middle, round which runs a ledge of polished wood called the itama, or board space, on which travellers sit while they bathe their soiled feet with the water which is immediately brought to them, for neither with soiled feet nor in foreign shoes must one advance 1 step on the matted floor. On one side of the doma is the kitchen, with its 1 or 2 charcoal fires, where the coolies lounge on the mats and take their food and smoke, and on the other the family pursues their avocations. In almost the smallest tea-house there are 1 or 2 rooms at the back, but all the life and interests are in the open front. In the small tea-houses there is only an irori, a small hole in the floor, full of sand or white ash, on which the live charcoal for cooking purposes is placed, and small racks for food and eating utensils. But in the large ones there is a row of charcoal stoves, and the walls are garnished up to the roof with shelves, and the lacquer tables and lacquer and chinaware used by the guests. The large tea-houses contain the possibilities for a number of rooms which can be extemporized at once by sliding paper panels, called fusuma, along grooves in the floor and in the ceiling or cross-beams. When we stopped at wayside tea-houses, the runners bathed their feet, rinsed their mouths, and ate rice, pickles, salt fish, and broth of abominable things, after which they smoked their tiny pipes, which gave them 3 whiffs for each filling. As soon as I got out at any of these, one smiling girl brought me the tobacco bon, a square wood or lacquer tray with a china or bamboo charcoal holder and ash pot upon it, and another presented me with a zen, a small lacquer table about 6 inches high, with a tiny teapot with a hollow handle at right angles with the spout, holding about an English teacup full, and 2 cups without handles or saucers, with a capacity of from 10 to 20 thimblefuls each. The hot water is merely allowed to rest a minute on the tea leaves, and the infusion is a clear, straw-colored liquid with a delicious aroma and flavor, grateful and refreshing at all times. If Japanese tea stands, it acquires a coarse bitterness and an unwholesome astringency. Milk and sugar are not used. A clean-looking wooden or lacquer pail with a lid is kept in all tea-houses, and though hot rice, except to order, is only ready 3 times daily, the pail always contains cold rice, and the coolies heat it by pouring hot tea over it. As you eat, a tea-house girl, with its pail beside her, squats on the floor in front of you and fills your rice bowl till you say, "Hold, enough." On this road it is expected that you leave 3 or 4 sen on the tea tray for a rest of an hour or 2 and tea. All day we traveled through rice swamps along a much frequented road as far as Kasukabe, a good-sized but miserable-looking town, with its main street like one of the poorest streets in Tokyo, and halted for the night at a large yadoya with downstairs and upstairs rooms, crowds of travelers, and many evil smells. On entering, the housemaster or landlord, the teishi, folded his hands and prostrated himself, touching the floor with his forehead 3 times. It is a large, rambling old house, and fully 30 servants were bustling about in the daidokoro, or great open kitchen. I took a room upstairs, that is, up a steep step-ladder of dark polished wood, with a balcony under the deep eaves. The front of the house upstairs was one long room with only sides and a front, but it was immediately divided into 4 by drawing sliding screens or panels covered with opaque wallpapers into their proper grooves. A back was also improvised, but this was formed of frames with panes of translucent paper, like our tissue paper, with sundry holes and rents. This being done, I found myself the possessor of a room about 16 feet square, without hook, shelf, rail, or anything on which to put anything, nothing, in short, but a matted floor. Do not be misled by the use of this word, matting. Japanese house mats, tatami, are as neat, refined, and soft a covering for the floor as the finest Axminster carpet. They are 5 feet 9 inches long, 3 feet broad, and 2½ inches thick. The frame is solidly made of coarse straw, and this is covered with very fine woven matting, as nearly white as possible, and each mat is usually bound with dark blue cloth. Temples and rooms are measured by the number of mats they contain, and rooms must be built for the mats, as they are never cut to the rooms. They are always level with the polished grooves or ledges which surround the floor. They are soft and elastic, and the finer qualities are very beautiful. They are as expensive as the best Brussels carpet, and the Japanese take great pride in them, and are much aggrieved by the way in which some thoughtless foreigners stamp over them with dirty boots. Unfortunately, they harbor myriads of fleas. Outside my room an open balcony with many similar rooms ran round a forlorn aggregate of dilapidated shingle roofs and water butts. These rooms were all full. Ito asked me for instructions once for all, put up my stretcher under a large mosquito net of coarse green canvas with a fusty smell, filled my bath, brought me some tea, rice, and eggs, took my passport to be copied by the housemaster, and departed, I know not whither. I tried to write to you, but fleas and mosquitoes prevented it, and besides, the fusuma were frequently noiselessly drawn apart, and several pairs of dark, elongated eyes surveyed me through the cracks, for there were 2 Japanese families in the room to the right, and 5 men in that to the left. I closed the sliding windows with translucent paper for window panes called shoji, and went to bed, but the lack of privacy was fearful, and I have not yet sufficient trust in my fellow creatures to be comfortable without locks, walls, or doors. Eyes were constantly applied to the sides of the room. A girl twice drew aside the shoji between it and the corridor. A man, who I afterwards found was a blind man, offering his services as a shampooer, came in and said some, of course, unintelligible words, and the new noises were perfectly bewildering. On one side, a man recited Buddhist prayers in a high key. On the other, a girl was twanging a samisen, a species of guitar. The house was full of talking and splashing, drums and tom-toms were beaten outside, there were street cries innumerable, and the whistling of the blind shampooers, and the resonant clap of the fireman who perambulates all Japanese villages and beats 2 pieces of wood together in token of his vigilance, were intolerable. It was a life of which I knew nothing, and the mystery was more alarming than attractive. My money was lying about, and nothing seemed easier than to slide a hand through the fusuma and appropriate it. Ito told me that the well was badly contaminated, the odors were fearful, illness was to be feared as well as robbery. So unreasonably I reasoned. My bed is merely a piece of canvas nailed to 2 wooden bars. When I lay down, the canvas burst away from the lower row of nails with a series of cracks, and sank gradually till I found myself lying on a sharp-edged pole which connects the 2 pair of trestles, and the helpless victim of fleas and mosquitoes. I lay for 3 hours, not daring to stir lest I should bring the canvas altogether down, becoming more and more nervous every moment, and then Ito called outside the shoji, "It would be best, Miss Bird, that I should see you." What horror can this be? I thought, and was not reassured when he added, "Here's a messenger from the legation, and 2 policemen want to speak to you." On arriving, I had done the correct thing in giving the housemaster my passport, which, according to law, he had copied into his book, and had sent a duplicate copy to the police station, and this intrusion near midnight was as unaccountable as it was unwarrantable. Nevertheless, the appearance of the 2 mannikins in European uniform, with the familiar batons and bull's-eye lanterns, and with manners which were respectful without being deferential, gave me immediate relief. I should have welcomed 20 of their species, for their presence assured me of the fact that I am known and registered, and that a government which, for special reasons, is anxious to impress foreigners with its power and omniscience, is responsible for my safety. While they spelled through my passport by their dim lantern, I opened the Yezo parcel and found that it contained a tin of lemon sugar, a most kind note from Sir Harry Parkes, and a packet of letters from you. While I was attempting to open the letters, Ito, the policeman, and the lantern glided out of my room, and I lay uneasily till daylight, with the letters and telegram for which I had been yearning for 6 weeks, on my bed unopened. Already I can laugh at my fears and misfortunes, as I hope you will. A traveller must buy his own experience, and success or failure depends mainly on personal idiosyncrasies. Many matters will be remedied by experience as I go on, and I shall acquire the habit of feeling secure. But lack of privacy, bad smells, and the torments of fleas and mosquitoes are, I fear, irremediable evils.